G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Now we're in a very interesting spot. This is the Syrian headquarters, now located in northern Israel. Now some of you may know where this is, some of you may not. Now this is the headquarters where Egyptian-born Israeli Mossad spy Eli Cohen made it into the absolute upper echelon of the Syrian military and political scene, posing as a Syrian businessman. But more on that is going to come in a video specifically talking about espionage and spying and how this plays such a massive role that we may not see in wars that we report on around the world. But I just thought while I'm here, this would be a great intro. So look, let's jump into the video on the Ukraine and Russian update and see what is happening.
G'day legends and welcome back to my office. I hope that you are having a fantastic day. Now I am super jet lagged, so I'm going to try and keep this short, but we'll be back to our usual daily reporting with some special bits and pieces put in maybe on 2 videos a day to catch up on some videos I haven't released yet, but also to talk about some things that I want to speak about. Now, what are we going to talk about today? We have to talk about a video released by Azov and then what Medvedev has said about this. We need to look at what Zelensky has said at a press conference. And of course, we need a big catch up on the maps. It has been, I flew for 42 hours, including my stopovers. It was a hell of a trip to get back. And that doesn't include getting to the airport, getting out of the airport, all of that. So we've missed maybe 4 or 5 days. So we have a lot of map updates to look at and some areas where there has been now an occupation. So we'll look over that. We'll look over some footage. Now, I haven't talked about this, but of course we had former President Donald Trump then have an unbelievably close call with Iran. Now, I'm not one for the conspiracies around this. I know more will come out, and of course, anything like this is going to be a hell of a lot. But what I will say is I think the media, bloggers, other politicians have a level of blood on their hands. The constant fear-mongering, drawing just ridiculous comparisons between himself and other dictators, like a Hitler type, is absolutely has had an effect on radicalizing a young person to the point of doing this. Whether you love him or hate him, regardless, to draw the comparison between himself or Stalin or Mao is just absolutely ridiculous. And as well, that in a democratic system like this, having assassination attempts on a leader who has been elected before and is running again in a democratic system is unbelievably insane, and the people supporting this need to have a look inwardly. Democracy is not just when it supports then you. And that's exactly what people talk about when they say total democracy, referring back to the Soviet Union, where everyone has a say, but everyone agrees. And the only reason to disagree is if you're an enemy of the state. And that is something no one wants to fall into. So let's have a look at this first off the bat. Now, Dmitry Medvedev, of course, the deputy chairman to the Security Council of the Russian Federation, has then said this on Telegram. Now, let's have a look at this and then we'll say what he's then referring to, and I'll talk about this as well. My comrades are discussing what the Ukrainian monsters did to our prisoner, referring to the Geneva Conventions known to the whole world. I was taught well at my native university. You don't even need to write about it. There can be no mercy here. There is no place for good here. Just kill. Like Simonov, whom referred many times. Remember, no need to feel sorry for them. No need. Nobody have they pardoned anyone. Only total executions. No choice. There are no words about mercy, no humanity, no pardon. They have no right to life. Execute, execute, execute. This is the right of war for the enemy. Kill at least one, so kill him quickly. How many times do you see him? So many times, and kill him. So here as well, talking about how you should be feeling towards the Ukrainians and how you should then treat their soldiers as well here, with some dangerous words and some concerning bits and pieces in here. They have no right to life. Execute, execute, execute. Absolutely, we need to look at this and, of course, judge this as well. But what it's referring to is then this video that was posted, there is uncensored footage of this as well from the infamous Azov battalion. Now, in this, there is a point where one of the soldiers then comes around a corner. There appears to be a Russian soldier on his knees, and then he's shot. Now, the first time I saw this, I thought, this doesn't look good. This guy, in my eyes, from the footage, and of course, we don't have absolutely everything, but appears to be hors de combat, that he is out of then the fight. And as well, taking a prisoner can do a lot for swap backs. You have a lot of leverage with a prisoner, of course, of information as well. Now, situations like this should absolutely require an investigation. When you see footage like this, that it's not that clear. But as we know, war crimes in this war, whether by drone, whether by gun, whether by whatever, have been systemic on both sides of this conflict. I've talked about this in length. Drones or a finger on the trigger, there is no difference in this. Regardless of what people talk about, of the ability to take prisoners or whatever, drones are not the issue. It's that no one's willing to police. And I say systemic because we see so much of this. And we have also seen that neither Russia or Ukraine has presented then a single case of self-policing or a realistic, proper self-investigation into potential crimes committed. And in my opinion, this has absolutely led to further executions on the front line because people are getting away with it, as well as then soldiers refusing to surrender. Of course, we see the drones taking out guys who are injured or surrendering. Primarily, we actually see that from Ukrainian videos. And then we see then as well footage of Russians executing by gun, Ukrainians as well. We have footage of that. And then we have officials like then Medvedev here talking then like this. Why then, if you're a Ukrainian who's read this, would you look at surrendering? Same on the other side. And we see then, of course, then people committing suicide as well. But the interesting part actually about this video, and we can see where some leaning of Silicon Valley might be, is actually this is monetized. This video is monetized. Now, as you will know, every time I talk about something like this, I get demonetized and I don't show any of it. So it's just an interesting bit. You can draw your conclusions here. But in my opinion, whenever and wherever this war will then be settled, I think there will be a complete 100% prisoner of war swap. And I actually don't think that anyone will really be brought to justice, which, as we have seen again, shows the uselessness and hypocrisy of these international systems in place. That these systems, they have no jurisdiction anywhere, nor are they willing to self-police. We see the exact same thing happening in the Middle East as we do as well in Europe. So let's have a look at some footage. We'll talk about a press conference. Now, we have actually the first footage. I know this is a couple of days old, but it's new to then the channel, of the first footage of a Fab 3000. Now, couple of things. We speculated that originally people were reporting that this was being dropped off a TU aircraft, and I said, well, by the load capacity of a Su-34, a Su-34 should be able to carry one of these, and it is. Now, the reason we said that was we said, look, with the Su-34, they're still making these. We don't think that they would want to put a TU long-range strategic bomber in the firing line as close as one of these to drop this. So we are correct on that. And then we see then the 3000 being dropped. Now, one thing we have seen is a chonky boy, the Chode bomb. One thing we have seen is definitely an increase in the accuracy of these Fab glide bombs overall. And in the beginning, the Fab 3000 was inaccurate like the Fab 500s were. And it has seemed that the capacity and the accuracy has increased, and you can see this here. Now, what some of the Russian pages were talking about was the ability to steer was significantly less, which, yeah, you've got 6 times the mass under this with same-ish size wings. It's not going to have the ability to steer. It's going to be more important to get that bomb off, because any input is not going to be, it's like a fighter jet versus an A380. Putting your flap is not going to have the same effect on something much larger and heavier. But we get the first footage of this here, and it is interesting to see these. And these are having a real effect on the front line and a devastating effect, not only in the ability to push through, but also psychologically on the soldiers. And the guys I speak to speak specifically about these, and the newer, bigger ones coming in are having just as much of an effect, although tactically maybe dropping 4 500s is tactically better, but the psychological impact of the 3,000 kilogram bomb It's a hell of a lot as well. Now, before we have a look then at the maps, let's talk about this press conference that Zelensky has had. Now, I can't find the full transcript of this, but we're working off Ukrainian media and Ukrainian pages to talk about what was then said here. Now, Noah Reports has put this up, that a peace plan is expected to be ready by November. Now, what we do know is the Swiss peace conference failed. The countries that signed, we already knew that they were basically going to sign. And yes, there's been some trickle in, but I not to sound like a prick, some of the countries that have trickled in on that to the geopolitical aspect of this war are not very important. If it's not India, Russia, China, or really getting the global south together, it's not going to change much here. And I'm from Australia, and I agree as well that Australia has nowhere near the influence of a lot of other nations involved here too. So I'm not just being a prick for prick's sake. It is true that if, Mali sign onto this, it's not as important as if Russia or China did. It's not one for one. Apologies, it just is that way. We'll actually talk about Mali in another video about Wagner PMC there and gold mines as well. Anyway, but speaking about this is from Ukrainiform, that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that Russian representatives should be present at the second peace summit. This is a big change from Ukraine refusing to have any Russian representatives in Switzerland to now this, saying, I believe that representatives of Russia should be present at the second peace summit. This is a big move, and this is very interesting to then see. We'd like to know what has changed. As we know, Russia for the last 6 months has had the initiative on the front line, and Ukraine has been having a lot of problems with energy, as well as by the vote betting odds today, Trump is looking at $1.30 to Biden at over $5, especially like we spoke about in the beginning, that guy who wanted to take out Trump actually ended up probably doing the best marketing move ever for him. But let's continue on this, that the preparation of the second peace summit should be completed in November this year, not very far away, right around that election time. We'll continue going according to plan. If these 3 points work, the first 3 points of the peace formula that were considered at the peace summit, number one is the nuclear safety, food security, and the release of POWs and return of children. Now remember, 5 and 6, they talk about territorial integrity and sovereignty. So that is really the crux of the war. Realistically, they should be number one. We know this is so much of what the war is on, but of course these are in massive escalation, and it's put in that way diplomatically as well. A full plan for the implementation of all points will be ready. I set a goal to have the plan completely ready in November. Therefore, everything will be ready at the second summit. It will be very interesting to see what is actually brought then to the second summit. Now, at the end of the day, with how things are looking, if Ukraine go to this second summit with it only to be agreed on of full territorial border integrity, sovereignty, whatever, Russia may not even attend. At this point, when Russia has then the initiative, why would they then attend? They spoke about the same with the Swiss peace conference. Even though we're not invited, we wouldn't have gone because it needs to have bearing in the realistic situation on the ground. The realistic situation on the ground is Russia occupy a lot of Ukraine. They're continuing to advance in the front line. Their economy and industrial capacity is far greater than we thought that it was. So it needs to take into account of that. It also is going to be a waste of time. It also needs China and India and America and all these other powers there as well. Now, apparently this will be in Turkey, like the initial peace negotiations we saw then in the beginning. So it will be very interesting to see what Ukraine actually bring to that. If it's wanting a peace at the end of it, well, it needs to take into account what is actually happening currently on the ground. And of course, negotiating, as much as, people may go, Russia should just turn and leave. Is that actually going to happen? No. If you want a peace, it can't be peace now. It can't be based on that. That if Ukraine, if it's basing on it, it needs its 1991 borders. The only way to do that currently is militarily. And of course, the cost of doing that, the time of doing that, is going to be years, and the cost is going to be massive as well. Let's have a look at a few more points that were said in this. Ukraine needs 25 Patriot systems for full protection. We know it needs to protect energy grid, needs to protect then civilian areas, military areas, and of course wherever the F-16s are going to go, which we have a bit of an idea because of where Russia's been bombing again and again. Russia should have representatives at the summit. Ukraine will receive F-16s by the end of summer and more by the end of the year, but this will not be sufficient. We've spoken about, will it be 10, will it be 20? We still know it's not that many. And I think in the beginning, we may see these more in an air defense role to get some experience on the pilots before we see a lot of frontline actions, but it will be interesting to see. And that Ukraine will join NATO immediately after the war ends. Now, this is one of the things that, again, talking in this second peace summit and what gets presented, that one of the things Russia is going to be bringing to the table is that Ukraine then remain neutral at the end of the war. And of course, being in NATO is not neutral. Even if it's a defensive alliance, it is not. If it's based on being a defensive alliance, then it's not neutral. And again, this could make that fall over at that point. Ukraine's enemy preservation partly depends on how powerful strikes against Russian generating facilities. Russia, of course, bombing those energy facilities. We know Ukraine only today, I believe, has actually dropped tariffs on energy systems coming in like generators and this. I don't know why that wasn't dropped 2 years ago. We know right in the beginning of the war, Ukraine dropped all tariffs on vehicles coming in. And if you went to the border back in March, April 22, you'd see, I'm not kidding you, supercars crossing the border because there's no tariffs on them. I don't know why these generators and things like this had any tax tariffs if you're not willing to have it on a Ferrari. Mobilization in Ukraine is proceeding as planned, but there are still shortages. So more men being mobilized, but still have a shortage as well. We know it's going to be one of the biggest problems for Ukraine is just sheer manpower. But again, we'll see. Let me know what you think of the peace conference, what actually gets brought forward. But again, like I say, if the goal is peace at the end of the conference, not just a rally support like the last one and get more weapon systems, if the goal is guns falling silent, it needs to take in the both realities of Russia and Ukraine for a no BS approach. Anyway, let's then have a look at the maps, and we've got at least 4 or 5 days to go through. So, of course, here is Ukraine, the centre, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, and we're up then, if this will load forward for me, on the 17th. Now, we're going to be up and down all over the map just a little bit, but you're going to have to bear with me, and we have some interesting updates. We've got a lot of updates as well. So where I want to come down into first, Donetsk Oblast, we need to come down into Avdiivka. Now, I'm going to sound like a prick, but it's sort of happening like we have then said. Now, what have we said previously? Right, that Russia has a few goals here. They want to reach this intersection, or at least get fire control in this intersection, to really have an effect between Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, as well, to affect logistical supply to Donetsk, New York, and these areas up here. Now, Russia is advancing in that direction. What we've also said is, and we've said this for now 3 or 4 months, these open areas here are incredibly difficult to not only defend, but they're also incredibly difficult to attack too. Open ground. That what Russia will do is go urban centre to urban centre, and what we'll see are these open grounds then collapse probably fairly quickly once it gets enveloped, and then a withdrawal because it's too hard to defend. We're seeing very similar to this. So today, this is then the changes we see out into this area here. Another town as well, expanding control out near Yevnivka, out from Brohez, and into Novoselivska, Persha too. Step back to yesterday, then we just see a step out from Ulmansk into this open territory. Then on the 15th, we see further step towards Prohez, the north of Ulmansk, and then a closing up of this territory in here, in Netalyove, to Ulmansk. And this is what we have said, that this area in here is a problem. That Ukraine's either going to have to come out here or come out through this gap here somewhere, and we're not sure exactly where a crossing could be. But this is a threat in here. We spoke about before of could Russia get trapped in here, or will Ukraine potentially get trapped in here? And it's looking like the latter. Now, what have I done? Sorry, day before, more of a close up around Novoselivska, Persha, and then we come back to then, I think the last time we spoke was about here. We see push out towards then this intersection here. Let's go back to the 12th, and then no real change. So let's have a look here from the 11th, and then let's step up then to today. We're just focusing on this area here, and then we see this closing up of these large open areas, a movement down in the urban areas, and of course more pushing then out towards this intersection as well. I don't want to sound like a prick, but it's very similar to what we have then spoken about. Oh, I don't know what I've just done. Anyway, let's have a look at then the Syriac map updates and have a look at what they are then saying. Now, He's showing as well on day 869, the Russian army seized northern warehouses of Novoselivska, Persia. So in this area here, just as we have then spoken about, this was a few days ago, of course, these are lining up very, very closely. Now, we step up to day 871. We see then a closing up around then Novoselivska, Persia, Urmansk area just in here. That 1 kilometer, which is less than 1 kilometer the distance truce. Meanwhile, last 2 days, Russian forces have advanced to the east of Novoselivska, Persia, already fighting Ukrainian army inside the locality. So showing here more of a close up in and around here, but we have seen, right, when we step through the map between Urmansk and here, has been then, let's see if we can, this close up then across here. Now, these are significant gains. I don't care what side of this war you're sitting on. If it was your side doing this, you would say that this are significant. Now, what we saw was the changes up in then the north of this front around here and the expansion of then grey zone. Now, this is exactly the same areas as well, Novoselivska, Persia again. Now, a more of a push out towards Prohez. If you remember, we saw that pushing over multiple days and then into this Lozovatsky. I'll learn to pronounce it, but a push into here and an occupation of there as well. So during the last 2 days, Russian army took control over most of the settlement of here and made new advances along the railway towards Prohez. Meanwhile, clashes in Novoselivska, Persia, whose control is divided half and half by both sides. So both maps lining up, showing what we presume to be then correct in Avdiivka, getting us a better idea of what exactly is happening in here. Now, let's just go just to the north of here. So we've, of course, got Avdiivka, then we have Bakhmut, two areas which will go down. No one knew before this war outside of Ukraine, but of course will go down in history as unbelievably huge battles. Now, just today, we see a further expansion up into New York. Now, this is where it's said that Russia actually have gone through tunnels in Donetsk and New York back under, behind the enemy in this case being Ukraine for Russia, and have actually had then effect on target there. So let's just step back to about the 9th. Then we see this expansion, the sausage maneuver, I'm calling it, or what was I calling it? The girth maneuver. Push up, expand, exact same we saw in Osheretny, we're seeing in New York. And then we do see further expansion of then the red zone. We see then as well the grey zone grow out from the Shumi to Zelensky as well. And then we're just at the base of it here, the girthy base, and then the changes out to New York there with some slight maneuver and different then grey zone here, but nothing too dramatic. But we do see that this is controlling and expanding ground, especially this out for the 2014 line. This is like we've talked about, once you get these urban centres, these open ground is going to be in danger, but it is concerning when you've got areas that have been for 10 years, where there have been defensive works for then 10 years, then falling in areas like this. And we have a couple of map updates from Syriac here then as well. Now, this is focusing on the New York, exactly like we have spoken about, the old girth maneuver down here, expanding then that sausage as well as into Toretsky and Zelensky right up here, showing both exact on the maps. Again, like we want to see, is when things line up. Now, what we spoke about was just today or yesterday, we did see the grey zone then shift here, showing that Russia controlled less ground. Now, this is being backed up then by Syriac. On Donetsk front, just look here. During the last hours, Ukrainian army counterattacked New York and recaptured the streets of these. So, showing, again, both maps, showing the same thing, that there was a counterattack there, and that Russia then controlled less territory. Stay with me, we're just moving north. Now, in here, I've already gone through this map. There is no real change around New York around Bakhmut for the last week, but let's then have a look on Syriac. Now, this is down near Klishkivka, which is down in here. Again, showing this significantly different on these maps. Have a look at this tree line. This is the tree line. So Syriac is showing that Klishkivka is completely basically under control. Deep State is not showing this. This is shown different now for a long time. During the last 36 hours, Russian army made new advances in Klishkivka to take control of the new parts of the Western Hills. So let's have a look. See these three reservoirs here? Three reservoirs. You can see how different then the level of control in here between Deep State and Syriac is shown. Syriac is showing that basically all the grey zone here, even some of the green, is then under Russian control by Syriac. So very interesting to see. Now, of course, I know you would have seen some changes around Rozdilivki front here, but I do believe that we actually did report on this last time. I think we had some geolocated footage there as well. I'm not 100% sure when my last video actually then was. Now, before we go up into some other areas in the north, I actually want to come down into the southwest. Now, no changes are shown on this map then around Kharkiv, but there has been a lot of speculation 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, maybe a bit less than that, that Ukraine has actually withdrawn from these areas back across the Dnieper onto then the right bank, of course, in this situation being on the northern side. Now, this is actually then confirmed by Noel reports here as well, and he said in this that it is confirmed by the Ukraine Armed Forces that there was a withdrawal out of Kharkiv in the areas here, which basically are not shown on this map. Now, we're still not sure exactly what is going on down in here. It's very, very hard to get an idea. Some maps will say there is no Ukrainian presence on the left bank. Some will say that there is. It's hard to get an idea, but NOAA reports did report that there was a withdrawal from Kharkiv across the right bank. What we know is there is a hell of a lot of soldiers who have lost their lives on the left bank in here, trying to retake that on the Russian side, but also trying to hold it on the Ukrainian side. And a withdrawal here would be interesting to see strategically what this was of a failure or success. Now, from here, where I want to come, we're all over the map, but let's come then into just above Mariinka, Krasnodarivka in here. Now, there has been some changes. Let's step back through the days. I thought this map then showed it. I would have sworn this map showed it. Okay, I'm going crazy. But there is said to be advancements in Krasnodarivka. I swore this showed, but either way, it's saying then, I've got to go through this one more time. Really? My God, I'm going crazy, guys. But it is showing just to the south that Ukraine did have a offensive maneuver, a counterattack down in this direction, just down in here. But as you can see, this is all shown on grey zone on this map here, so they may not have really had anything to show. This is what happens if you don't show the movement up, you can't show then the movement back. I believe that's probably what's happening in areas like Vovchansk, where Ukraine is taking areas back, but they never showed the advancement in the beginning, so you can't show that. Anyway, Donetsk City, it lasted 36 hours. This is about 48 hours ago now. Ukrainian army launched counterattack southwest of Krasnodarivka, recaptured a farm in this axis, re-establishing a presence in this area, then down in here. Now, let's have a look, because we can say that Russia may be advancing in Krasnodarivka itself, and other maps have been showing this. Is why I was certain on this map. I've seen definitely Ukrainian maps showing movement here, but it does show that the day after this, so date 8/72, that Russian army reversed latest Ukrainian army gains southwest of Krasnodarivka, so only then a day that they were there. It's saying they reversed these, but then Russia actually had made attacks in Krasnodarivka itself and are taking more control on these axes. We do know that Russia made some ground in here. It's only ever shown by grey zone shift there. So we do know there has been some shift in here over the past week or so, and then Surik is saying that there is more shift than we are seeing. Now, I believe we see just to the south of here, the Vuhledar front, I'll call it, which of course, the fall of Mariinka puts this main road through here in a difficult position as well, but we do know the supply to area like Vuhledar is a lot better due to the new train line between Rostov and Sevastopol that runs through Mariupol, as well as Berdyansk, that there is another line now heading up into this area to supply the Russians better. And then we see just a slight grey zone shift between the 16th and then the 17th, just here in between here. So no massive changes, but we are seeing definitely a small shift there. Now we need to come just west of here, and this is where we have seen one of the most major things over the past few days. Then we can see then the fall of Starmorsky Urzani. We saw Starmorsky the other day, and then we see this step up. Let's have a measure of this of 2.46 kilometers here of Russia advancement through Urzani. Of course, then returning gains that Ukraine had in its 2023 counter-offensive. Now, this is then backed up by then two Syriac maps here, showing just the beginning of this. And then let's have a look at where this has then ended up. Now, this shows right in here, this Urzani front. Now, it does show more control just to the western side of here, but overall it's showing very, very similar mutual control over the locality of Ryazan, continues advancing north of Samorsky by capturing a series of trenches and warehouses from the Ukrainian army. So we're talking about one of the difficult things here is this then river that runs, but Russia now has a presence on both the east and western side of here, and these were very costly advances for Ukraine last year coming through these areas. Russia is returning these fronts, but we can talk on a strategic and tactical scale that Ukraine may be stepping back to lengthen the Russians and wear them down as they're having advancements as well. We're not 100% sure that's what's happening, but we need to take it into our accounts of what could then be occurring. Now, let's come up into Makivka. So let's step back then. I believe it's the 14th we see. Yes, just a Russian gain just around Makivka here. Now, again, this front line, it does show differently between Syriac and the deep state map on some control, but we get this red dot here. Now, the best way to line this up is see where this road runs. This is said road here. So, of course, showing a little bit more control west, but it's also showing a lot more control in the north section as well. See where this road runs? This is that road. So it's showing a lot different control around Makivka, but during the last 5 days, Russian army took control of 30%. So what we can say is both maps are showing a change. They're showing a different amount of change, but we can confirm that there's definitely been some change, if that then makes sense. Now we're going to pick up from here. Now we haven't seen any change from here right up through the main then front in the north here by any of the maps. But we then do see then the 3 axes that Russia is on in the north of the country between Belgrade and then Ukraine. We then can see that this has turned back to blue here, and this turned back between the 12th and then the 13th that Ukraine had then a push of the Russians there. Now, Holoboki, we know that Ukraine was attempting then a flank maneuver here. We haven't really seen any change on this front. If we step back to the 12th, no change since we have spoken. But again, this is what I think the trap has happened here is I believe that these was never shown the advancement, so it can't show then the Ukrainian push back in this. But this is confirmed on that westerly push that Ukraine then had a push on the Russians there as well. So showing a very similar amount of control around this flank maneuver as well around the back on the northern side of Holoboki here. So we'll talk about what exactly happened there, but let's just then have a look in then Vovchansk now as well. Of course, last time we spoke that there was rumours that Russia had actually crossed then to the southern side of the Volcha River. This still shows this disconnect. Now, whether there is a disconnect here physically or not, there must be supply to these elements. It's now been over 3 weeks. There's no way you can have... remember, the media was saying that there was 400 Russian soldiers trapped in this little bit here. You can't last more than 24, 36 hours like that on ammo and food and water. There's definitely a resupply if there is any level of disconnection at all. Now, what we can see here, this is where it's not being shown and shown differently on the maps. Now, what Syriac is showing is that Ukraine has pushed from the west to east into the center of Vovchansk and taken back ground, but the Russians have also expanded then just in this area here. See where this circle bit of tree line is, just in these blocks here, have then come to the south as well, of course having a risk of then cut off here too. So let's have a look and we'll talk about those 3 changes that we have then seen from this axis. Ukraine army managed to capture the border locality. That was the far western one. Kharkiv axis, which is then this Holoboki one. That Ukraine army increased control of the warehouses north, so that push around. Chuhiv axis, which is this Vovchansk front here. Last 4 days, heavy fighting have taken place in the town of Vovchansk. Russian army regained control of some positions in the northeast and continued to advance along the other bank of the Vovch, so on the southern side, reaching the agricultural school. Meanwhile, Ukraine army does not give up and continues to launch counterattacks, which allowed it to recapture several buildings in these streets in an attempt to outflank the hospital under Russian control. So we have seen that this area has been really brought to rubble, and where the hospital sits right in and around the centre here. Of course, we saw those then JDAMs landing too. So trying to then outmaneuver the Russians in here, not being shown on these on the deep state map. But what we will say, if we can see then a Ukrainian advancement on the Syriac, most likely this map just hasn't updated to show this. Now as well, we have another thing about what's happened here too. Of course, Ukraine's firing a lot of ordnance for a lot of time across into Russian territory around the Belgorod Oblast here. Now what we have seen is that 14 villages have then been evacuated and shut off to civilians around this area, from the governor saying it's an extremely difficult situation due to Ukrainian shelling. that only adult men accompanied by military or government officials will be allowed in the settlements as long as they're in armoured vehicles wearing then personal protective equipment, body armour and helmet. Saying it is, I hope you will agree that it is unacceptable to let women and children into settlements that are shelled every day. We've already lost a lot of civilians, we have a lot of wounded, and of course our task is to maximise security measures. So of course this isn't the plan going ahead that Putin wanted to create, like this sanitary zone along here to stop that shelling and the crossings as well that we have seen. This is what we believe the Vovchansk Hlubokhy axis was never to capture Kharkiv. There was never enough guys, but to try and create that buffer sanitary zone there. Ukraine says Russian shelling of Ukrainian towns and cities has been devastating for nearly 2.5 years. So we know it's absolutely devastating both ways in here, and there's a hell of a lot going back and bringing the war home to people in here that have had then crossings by the Ukrainian claimed Russian units crossing back into Russia here on the axis, trying to get into Belgorod as well. But of course, we've seen a lot of shelling, a lot of rocket attacks into here as well, not only by domestic produced weapons, but by Western weapons here too. So now the movement out of then civilians. We have seen too, there's still a lot of towns in here with civilians on the Ukrainian side as well, that there are then evacuations occurring and have been for then a number of weeks and or months. But it needs to be said too that there are a lot of Ukrainians who are pro-Russian who then choose to stay in these areas, as well as people that just cannot afford to leave, or there may not be a way to leave from areas too. Now, Legends, I know this one was probably a little bit longer, but we had a lot to catch up on. I hope that you are having a fantastic day. I'm glad we're back in the office. I'm glad we're doing some reporting. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.